Yeah. All right, give me just a second to share everything that needs to be shared on Facebook, and then we'll go with our lesson. Again, for those of you just getting on, we're putting this out on all our pages, so bear with me, and we'll get started as soon as we get this last one shared. Yeah. All right, I think we're where we need to be. Appreciate everyone's patience with that. All right. You remember last week we got into Genesis chapter 4? Or not Genesis, I'm sorry, Exodus. Exodus chapter 4 is where we'll begin this afternoon, this evening. We've talked about Moses and his call from God. And that is where we're going to pick up today or tonight. You remember in Exodus 3, God comes to Moses in the burning bush. God comes and speaks to Moses. And as he speaks to Moses, Moses gave those excuses. Remember, he said, one, who am I? And number two, he said, who are you? We said in total, we're going to see there's 5 excuses given in these 3 chapters. Tonight, we're going to see the other 3 excuses that Moses gives concerning his work for God. And so this is what we're looking at as we talk about this, is the idea of Moses being called by God to deliver God's people, to bring them out. So we go to Exodus chapter 4. We start in verse 1, and we see the 3rd excuse. Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. And again, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, the hand was leprous like snow. Then God said, put your hand back inside your cloak. So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the flesh, like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. If they will not believe even these 2, or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on dry ground, and the water that you take from the Nile will become blood on dry ground. So let's go back and talk about these first 9 verses. We start back in verse 1, and Moses has asked again, who am I? And God said that you're the one I've chosen. And then God said, and he said, who are you? And God said, I am that I am. And now he says, well, why should they believe you? Why should people listen to you? And again, you notice that's what Moses says. He says, well, why will they believe me? There's nothing, no valid reason for them to believe me. And again, this is coming from a man who 40 years earlier tried to do this very thing that God is trying to get him to do now, who tried to lead Israel out of Egypt. We saw that in the previous weeks, how he was trying to get Israel to follow him. He was starting the groundwork to lead Israel out, and they refused to obey him. And so now he's almost to the point of asking, well, what's going to make this time different? What's going to make this time different than last time? And so what we see is that Moses begins to talk, and he asks, well, what's my proof that you're there? And this sets a precedent that we're going to see throughout the rest of the Old Testament. And that is that we're going to see that God is going to show who his disciples, show who his prophets, his people really are by the use of miracles. We're going to see Moses is going to fulfill this law. The prophets Elijah and Elisha are going to do this. Some of the minor prophets, major prophets that wrote did these things. And even to the New Testament, when Jesus comes, the proof of who he is, the proof that he is God's son, the proof that he is who he claims to be is seen in his miracles. And so what God does is God begins to set in motion a few miracles, a few signs. And again, remember, a point of a sign was to show validity, to show who this message came from. And so we see in verse 2 that God asked Moses, what's in your hand? He says, what is that? What is that in your hand? What do you have? And Moses answered with the staff. And again, this staff would have been a simple rod or stick that Moses would have used in shepherding. They would have two tools they would use, if you will. They had the rod and the staff. The rod was one was used to help guide the sheep. The other was used to pick sheep up. And so he's got this long staff in his hand. And God asks, what's that staff? And then God tells him in verse 3, throw it on the ground. Take that staff and throw it down on the ground. And so Moses does it. And it's very interesting how God commands Moses to do this, and Moses follows. And then this has always been an interesting verse to me. He throws it on the ground, it becomes a serpent, becomes a snake. And the end of verse 3 has always made me relate to Moses pretty well, because Moses sees it and he runs from it. Moses sees the staff that he just held in his hand become this snake. And what happens? He runs. He has to get away from it because he is in all of this miracle himself. Then that tells me, too, that not only does Moses want to show the Israelites proof that who he is, but God is also showing Moses the proof. He's showing Moses who he is, and I can see Moses' hesitation here of maybe being like some of us, not the fondest of snakes from verse 4, because God tells Moses to pick it up, but you notice he tells him you have to reach out your hand and catch it by the tail. Again, this is a trust in God, and the idea here about this trust and grab it by the tail is that if even with a regular snake, if you grab it by the tail, you got that chance to be bitten by it. And so this is one writer I read today said that even this act of him grabbing the serpent by the tail or grabbing the serpent at all was a proof of Moses' faith in God, that he listened to him, even though there may have been fear that he could have been bitten, and it could have been, and again, a snake. You tell me to grab a snake, I'm going to look at you funny, and I'm going to question that. But Moses does this. He grabs it. As soon as he grabs it by the tail, it becomes a rod again, or a staff. And then God says that this is done so that they can know, that they may believe. And again, they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to you. They say, God says, this is how you can know. This is how they will know who you are. They'll see this miracle. They'll realize it's not something that anybody can do, but it's only somebody special can do, only somebody with power can do. Excuse me. And they say, and God says, this is so they can know, so they can believe. They can hear your word, and they can believe that this is the same God. And he knows verse 6, God tells him again, he says, this time, Moses, I want you to do something else. He says, Moses, take your hand and put it inside your cloak. Now, again, the cloak at that time, they would have had an undergarment, and then they had a cloak, that big wrap, almost like a coat that we see, and it would have had a part that wrapped around. And so what Moses is doing is he is sticking his hand inside his cloak. He's sticking his hand inside to his breast. And God says, put your hand inside your cloak. And he puts his hand in, and when he pulls it back out, he took it out, and behold, his hand was leprous as snow. His hand had leprosy. And again, the idea is it's white as snow. The leprosy that's described here, some of the words described here are the same words that she used to describe Miriam later when she and Aaron try to stand up to Moses, and God strikes Miriam with leprosy. And Aaron describes that leprosy as being a leprosy that leads to death. Leprosy that was a severe leprosy that could defile a person. So when Moses sees this, it's not like he's just got a couple bumps on his hand. This is a major change in his hand, and his skin turns to white, and he's got these spots. And again, leprosy can describe a bunch of different skin diseases in the Old Testament. But the point is, this is noticeable. This is a noticeable thing that God has happened to Moses. And so I wondered here again how Moses must have felt. Imagine taking your hand being well, listening to God and sticking it in your cloak, and when you pull it back out, is diseased. What must have went through Moses' mind to see that? And again, God didn't tell Moses what he's going to do. He just tells Moses to follow these steps. Then he knows verse 7, God says, put your hand back inside your cloak. And so again, he takes his hand and puts it back inside his cloak. And this time when he pulls it back, his hand is restored. His hand is back to normal. And then so God tells him, if they will not believe you or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. And so he gives these two signs to Moses of what he's going to do, or what Moses needs to do to prove who he is. And we're going to see that Moses is going to do these two signs to show the Israelite elders who he is, the proof that he is coming from God. And then verse 9, God tells them, he says, well, there's also a third sign I want you that you can do. Now, again, notice these signs are not, God didn't tell Moses you're going to have to do all three signs. He says, if you need to, if the first one doesn't work, and you use the second one. If both of those doesn't work, you use the third one. Well, what's the third one? The third one is very interesting for us of some foreshadowing. Sort of some irony, if you will, of looking ahead, and that God tells Moses, and they won't listen to you the third time for the second sign. He said, this is the third one. You'll take some water from the Nile. And when you take that water from the Nile, you pour it out on the dry ground. And when you pour that water on the dry ground, it becomes blood. And the idea is that this is the power of God to change this water into blood. And again, this plague is, or this sign is reminiscent, and it's a foreshadowing of that first plague of Moses, or of God to Pharaoh, that turning the water to blood. Excuse me, I'll get it right in a minute. And so this is what God is planning to do. This is what God tells Moses to do. Well, I told you, we're at excuse 3. We're going to go to excuse 4 of Moses. But Moses said to the Lord, oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue. Then the Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. But he said, oh my Lord, please send someone else. Now the fourth excuse is verse 10. The fifth excuse is verse 13. Verse 10, Moses says, God, I can't do it because I can't speak. I'm not eloquent. Again, the Hebrew word for eloquent has been discussed about what it means. Is Moses saying he wasn't an eloquent speaker? Did he not use fancy words? Or was Moses saying he was afraid to speak in front of a group? What did Moses mean here by being eloquent? We really don't know. But Moses says that his entire life, either in the past or since you've spoken to your servant, now, he says, I am slow of speech and tongue. Moses is downplaying his ability. And again, I think this is a clear indication that he is downplaying this ability. He is downplaying his ability to speak. Moses, raised in Pharaoh's house, would have been taught proper etiquette, would have been taught how to speak and how to address dignitaries. So Moses, yes, he's been away for 40 years, but Moses still had this in his mind, I believe. Some think that maybe him saying I'm not eloquent is him saying I don't speak the Egyptian language anymore. Again, he's been in Midian for 40 years. He may be trying to say he doesn't speak Egyptian as well as he used to. But God counters that. Again, every time Moses gives an excuse, God counters it with an inarguable point. Because not once has Moses repeated excuses. And then you get to verse 11, God says, who made man's mouth? Moses, you think you're telling me something I don't know, or something that that you can trick me with? Who made man's mouth? Who created man? Who made man the way he is? He says, I did. And then the second part of this is very interesting. And this is something we sometimes don't want to talk about or argue or look at or discuss, but it's a very interesting verse where he says, who makes mute or deaf or seeing or blind? If we were just talk random to each other and talk about, well, who made people to see? We say, oh, that's God. But if I were to ask you, who made someone mute? Who made someone deaf? Who made someone blind? We would sometimes hesitate. Well, I don't know if God would do that. That something happened in their birth, something happened with this or something happened with that. But here God plainly says that there's some times that he does the mute, that he makes the mute, he makes the deaf, he makes the blind. He doesn't give a reason for that. Again, I think that reasoning will fall back to his argument in Job, in that God has a greater understanding of this world and the way it works than we do for allowing this to happen. But God says that I can control it. And the idea is God is telling Moses, if I can make it mute, make it deaf, make it blind, where it doesn't work, then I can make it work much better than it should. I can help you. And then he knows therefore he says, he said, now therefore go to Egypt, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. God says, I'll be with you. Don't worry about what to say. I'll guide you. I'll show you. I'll teach you what you need to say. I'll help you do what you need to do. It's just very similar to me when I read these words. This reminds me of what Jesus tells the disciples, the apostles, when he gets ready to die. And he says, the Holy Spirit is coming in the book of John, that he says, don't worry about what you'll speak, that he will give you the words to say. This is very similar to what God is telling Moses. Moses, don't worry, you're speaking my word. I will tell you what to say, and you don't have to fear. You don't have to worry about any of that. And so he goes on in verse 13 to give his fifth and final excuse. And that is, oh, my Lord, please send someone else. Here Moses finally gives up trying to come up with an excuse for this, and he just tells God how he really feels. God, is there not somebody else who could do this? Find somebody else who could go. Please, please, God. And this is one of the most human moments being Moses that we see to show just how human he is, because very few examples in the Bible are men called by God and they say, no, God, I don't want your calling. No, God, go find somebody else. I don't feel it. But here Moses does. Moses says, God, is there not somebody else? Is there not someone else who could do this? And you got to think, you got to picture this from God's standpoint. God's probably thinking, hey, Moses, I called you. If there was somebody else, don't you think I'd have called them? If somebody else could do this, if I wanted somebody else to do this, if somebody else is fit for this job, don't you think I would have gotten with them instead of you? And that's sort of what God says next. Verse 14, then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And taking your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs. And so God hears Moses' fifth excuse, and God gets angry. God gets mad at Moses. His anger is kindled. I've often wondered what that must have been like. You remember Moses is standing in front of a burning bush. And to think about the anger being kindled, I can't help but imagine that bush gets a little hotter. That fire gets a little more stoked and a little bigger as it's flaming up. And God says, what about Aaron? Now, what's interesting about this is the first time we're introduced to Aaron. Now, when we think about Aaron, Moses and his family, we think about Aaron automatically, because after this point, we see Aaron in the family. This is the first time we've been told Moses has a brother. Now, we've been told earlier Moses' mother and father, and then talk about his sister, not giving names, but we're told he has others, but here he has a brother. And we kind of find out a little later on, we're going to see this in a few weeks, that Aaron is actually the older brother of Moses. I believe there is 3 years difference between Moses. I believe we get to chapter 6 of Exodus, it'll say that Moses was 80 and Aaron is 83. So Aaron is the older brother, and he calls him by the Levite. And again, this is a little bit of foreshadowing too, because the Levites have not been chosen as God's priest yet, but they're going to be. And so God says, what about Aaron? Aaron the Levite, he's a Levite just like you are. He says, I know he can speak good. I know he can speak well. I know that he is eloquent. And he says, look, he's coming to meet you. And when he sees you, he'll be glad. He'll be happy to see his brother. Imagine that again. We talk about this with Jacob and Esau. Imagine being 40 years without seeing your brother. And even before that, you just seen your brother here and there when he was in Pharaoh's court. But 40 years, you've not heard hide nor hair. You don't know anything about your brother. And then all of a sudden, one day, here he is. He comes up, he pops up, and he's walking on the scene. And God says that you will speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. God says, here's what we're going to do, Moses. I'm going to let you speak through Aaron, but here's the thing. God tells Moses, I'm not going to let you out. I'm not going to let you free. Because Moses wants God to say, okay, I'll use Aaron, and I'll just use Aaron. Don't worry about Moses. You stay here and watch your sheep, and I'll do this without you. But God says, no, I'm going to get somebody else to help you. Not to take your place, but to help you. And he says, here's what's going to happen. And this is sort of the interesting thing. God sort of complicates this system. And I say complicate, I'm not meaning in a bad term, but making it more laborsome. Is God says, here's what's going to happen, Moses. I'm not going to talk to Aaron. I'm going to talk to you. And then you're going to speak to Aaron and tell Aaron what to say. And then Aaron's going to go and tell the people what to say. God's plan is typically the prophet, and this is what we see the layout of a prophet. Typically, a prophet was God spoke to the prophet, and the prophet spoke to the people. Here, God tells Moses here in verse 16 that he'll speak to the people for you, Aaron, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. He says, basically, you're taking my role. Yeah, I'm going to speak to you, you're going to speak to Aaron, and then Aaron's going to tell the people. But God promises Moses, now this is very interesting too in verse 15, God promises Moses, I will be with his mouth and your mouth. I will look after both of you to ensure and to make and to prove that you are saying the proper words. You're teaching what I have told you to teach. And then he goes to verse 17, he says, and take in your hand this staff. This is very interesting. He says, Moses, take this staff. This staff is going to become very important. This staff is going to be the staff that Moses is going to do these miracles in Egypt with. This staff is going to be the staff that Moses holds over the Red Sea as it's parted. This staff is going to be the staff that Moses carries throughout his journeys. And we're told over and over again, it's the same staff that God tells him. And this staff has its start here at the burning bush. And it's going to go with Moses for the rest of his life. Whenever we get to verse 18 of chapter of Exodus 6 or 4, excuse me. And it says, Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. And the Lord said to Moses in Midian, go back to Egypt, for all the men who are seeking your life are dead. So Moses took his wife and his sons and had them ride on a donkey and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the staff of God in his hand. Now, Moses is a man of 80 years old at this time, and this is a sign of respect, a sign of honor to Jethro. And that he goes to Jethro, and he asks Jethro's permission to go back to his family. Let me go back to Egypt, see whether they're still alive. Jethro could very well have said no, but we see Jethro tells him, go in peace. Moses, you want to go back to your family? You want to go back and see your people? Go. That's fine. And again, Moses is not just going, but Moses is also taking with him his wife and his 2 sons. Now, this is the first time we're told Moses has 2 sons. In this passage here, it just says sons. We're going to see in a minute there's 2 of them. Up to this point, we've only heard about Moses' 1 son. And so when Moses gets ready to go back to Midian, or go to leave Midian, God comes to him again. God comes to him again and says, go back to Egypt. And someone said, well, this is strange that 3 times God tells Moses in this short chapter to go to Egypt, go to Egypt, go to Egypt, 3 different times. And some people say, oh, well, this is a sign this is a man-made document. That it was just a sign that there's multiple copies that they copy. No, this is just God making sure Moses knows where he's supposed to go and what he's supposed to do. And two, God gives me detail every time he goes. Here, God tells him, go back to Egypt and don't worry. And that's sort of the idea. Go back to Egypt, for all the men who are seeking your life are dead. Sort of very similar words to what we read in Matthew chapter 3. Or chapter 2, excuse me, when Joseph, Jesus' father, is told to go back. You know, when Herod starts to kill the children, Joseph gets that dream to go down to Egypt. And then when God comes down to him, or God comes back to him in a dream and says, the men who seek the child's life are dead, you can go back home. That's sort of what he does with Moses. Moses, don't worry, don't be afraid. The people who are seeking your life, the Pharaoh, those who are trying to kill you, they're dead and gone. They've forgotten about what you did. And so Moses takes his wife, his two sons, and they begin to ride on a donkey back to the land of Egypt. And again, here's another repetition in verse 17 and verse 20. He's got that staff. He's got that staff that's with him. And then verse 21, again, God comes back to Moses. And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles I put in your power. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son. And I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son. And so again, God comes back to Moses and says, Moses, when you go back to Egypt, this is what you're going to do. Go to Pharaoh. Now, remember earlier, God told him, you take these three signs and you show them to the elders of Israel. You show them to the Israelites to prove who God is. Now, God says, I want you to go do those same three miracles in front of Pharaoh. I want you to go show Pharaoh these miracles and show Pharaoh this power. And he says, but, and this has always been an interesting part of me, he says, but I'm going to tell you, they're not going to listen to you. Pharaoh will harden his heart. God says, I will harden his heart, and he will not let the people go. The idea here, I believe, is that God is not going to force Pharaoh's heart to be hardened, but God is going to let it happen. God is going to allow Pharaoh to harden his heart. Again, God being the God he is, he could have very well made Pharaoh believe and let his people go, but he's going to show Pharaoh who he really is. He's going to allow Pharaoh to do what Pharaoh wants to do. But God tells Moses, look, he's going to harden his heart. He's not going to listen to you. And he says in verse 22, then you shall say to Pharaoh, now this is again foreshadowing. Thus says the Lord is the God, the Lord, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son. And what God basically says is Israel is my firstborn son, and what you have done to my firstborn, I'm going to do to yours. You have tried to kill, you have tried to destroy, you tried to weaken my firstborn son. Now I'm going to kill your firstborn son. And we know that as history, when we know the story of Exodus, we know that as a foreshadowing of the event of the last plague. But God told Moses from the beginning, this is what's going to happen. And this is sort of an interesting thing that we look at. We look at these 10 plagues. And sometimes we think, well, did God need all 10? Well, whether he needed them or not, we see here God knew. God knew he was going to do all 10. He knew that 10th plague was going to convince Pharaoh. But I think he had to do the other 9 to show Pharaoh who he was and prove who he was. So not only Pharaoh, but also the Israelites would hear him when he calls them out. And so here we see this speaking to Moses in verse 23. Then we get to verse 24. Now I'll tell you, verse 24 to 26 is one of the most interesting passages in Exodus because it is hard to figure out exactly what this passage is about. I will read it and I'll explain it to you. At a lodging place in the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. Then Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it and said, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me. So he let him alone. It was then that she said, a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision. So basically what we have is Moses is traveling back with his family to Egypt. And on the way there, Moses and his family is at a lodging place or somewhere probably for the night or for a few days. We don't really know. And God comes down and God meets him. Again, this is not the physical God coming down. What this is this is a way of describing God in human terms, that God met him And it talks about God's hand being upon him. That's the same idea. God met him. God come down and saw his death. Again, the idea is probably he's stricken with some kind of disease, some kind of sickness that has Moses at the point of death. And the only way to cure that is for Zipporah to circumcise her son. And it's very interesting that she knows what to do. She takes the flint, she takes a knife, and she circumcises her son. Again, we don't know how old this son is, but she does. And a lot of people have questioned, well, why does she do this? Why is this required? And it's because this was God's sign with Abraham. To be a Jew, you had to be circumcised. Moses had circumcised the son. And so he had to do this before he could go to the people and be part of them. But why didn't God tell him before? That's always the thing that's always made me wonder. Why didn't God tell Moses on the way, hey, you need to circumcise your son and make sure you have the covenant right? But for some reason, Moses does it, and this happens. And what happens is Zipporah throws his foreskin at Moses' feet, typically a sign of something she didn't want to do, again, to cause injury to her son, but she did it for Moses. And when she threw it at his feet, he became well. He became good. And again, she said, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me. Again, this is a reference, as the verse says in verse 26, to the circumcision. That Moses has become not just the relation, but also blood, that she's had to shed blood for him. Again, I really don't know all the details. I can't tell you exactly why all this happened like that, but it did. God's always important to include this. And so I find it very interesting. There is something interesting about this that I was reading about today, and that is that what happens with Moses happens in reverse order to what's about to happen to Pharaoh. In that Moses is struck with this illness, and the way to solve this is technically by the blood of his firstborn, the foreskin of his firstborn, and to be this bridegroom of blood. And so the blood is going to save him. That foreskin is going to save Moses. It's by his firstborn son that he's going to be saved, and he's going to be delivered. Like I said, there's sort of a foreshadowing of the opposite of the 10th plague when you look at this, because God's going to come upon them and take their firstborn unless they've got that blood of the sheep on the doorpost. And so it's very interesting what God does here. Moses is coming into Egypt. Later, he's going to take Israel out of Egypt. He's going to save the firstborn sons by blood, similar to how they're saved here. So there's some interesting parallels in these verses, but I really can't tell you exactly why this is all here. But that's the story of that. Notice these last, we're getting close to the end now. The Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. So he went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord with which he has sent to speak, and all the signs that he had commanded him to do. Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the people of Israel. Now, it's very interesting. God goes to Aaron and says, Aaron, go into the wilderness. I want you to meet Moses. Again, we really don't think that, from all indication, Moses and Aaron hasn't met each other in 40 years, at least. There's no indication that Moses has went back to Egypt or Aaron has come to Midian. They could have, we don't know, but here God tells Aaron to go, and Aaron goes. He goes without question. And when he goes, he goes and meets Moses at the mountain of God. So Moses gets the command at Sinai, leaves that to go home with the sheep, asks Jethro's permission to go, leaves there, has the whole episode with his son to have to be circumcised, just to get back to Mount Sinai where he started. And when he gets back to Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, there Aaron is, and Aaron meets him and kisses him and greets him. The idea of kissing him was a part of an embrace, part of a greeting in the ancient world. And so Moses begins to tell Aaron all that God spoke to him. Again, it's very interesting that God speaks to Aaron and says, go to Moses in the wilderness. And again, we may think, well, why didn't God just tell Aaron what he was willing to do? But God is proving his word to Moses. Hey, you're going to have to tell Aaron what to do. I feel Aaron got there. Says, okay, Moses, God told me to come to you. I don't know why. Don't know what this is about. Tell me what's happening. And so Moses lays it out for Aaron. And then when Aaron hears this, we see Aaron, apparently to me, has more faith in this than maybe Moses had, or more willingness, not necessarily faith, more willingness to go through with it, because we don't see Aaron miss a step. Aaron says, okay, let's go. And he goes and he gets to the people and he gathers all the elders together. The elders were the leaders of the Israelites, those higher up older men who have been in charge. And then we notice his last few things. Verse 30, Aaron spoke all the words of the Lord as spoken to Moses, and did the signs inside the people. And the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshiped. So Aaron comes back to the elders of Israel, and he begins to tell them exactly what God said. And he did the signs. He did what God told Moses to do. He's doing exactly what God had planned for it to be. And then you notice verse 31, and the people believed it. Not only the elders believed it, but the people of Israel believed it. They all heard it. They all had the hope. They all had the assurance that God was here. God had finally heard their cry. God had finally heard their plea. Now was the time to be delivered. And now is the time to wait. Because we're going to see that although the story of Genesis, or the Exodus story, seems to put this on a pretty tight timeline, it seems like Moses getting called and getting here fairly quick. There's going to be some time. Some people say a year, maybe more, in the time between Moses arriving in Egypt and Moses and the Israelites leaving Egypt. And we'll talk about that as we get through there. But the people here are excited. They're happy because they have seen, they've heard from God, they've seen the miracle, they believe God has come to find them. And so now they bow their heads, they worship God, they serve God, and they are praising God for his deliverance. And so that's where we end chapter 4. Chapter 5, next week, we're going to see Moses going to Pharaoh. We're going to begin to see that process of Moses and Aaron going to Pharaoh and calling Pharaoh and talking to Pharaoh about the Israelites and about what they're going to have to do and about what's going to happen to them as they go forward. But we'll see that next week. I appreciate everyone's time being here with us tonight. Don't forget, Sunday morning, we have our worship service at 10 a.m. at the church building or on Facebook or YouTube if you'd like to join us there. Then also remember our other classes. Remember Tuesday night class at 7 and also our Wednesday night class at 7 as well. Again, I appreciate everyone being here. I appreciate you watching it with us tonight. We hope to see you soon. And again, if there's anything we can do to help you, please let you know. But for now, that's all we're going to do tonight. Again, I appreciate you being here, and I hope that